For someone like me, I often associate the body or the nervous system with the subconscious, and so you make that distinction.
Yeah, it's a very clear distinction.
Okay.
So, in terms of information processing, information really is what we retrieve from the body or from the mind. There's levels 1 to 4 of information processing happens within the body, within the nervous system. It's only when we hit level 5 and level 6 does information gets processed in the subconscious. And level 7 is what we call the default mode network, and that's basically the background activity of the mind. So if you start meditating, or if you remember your first meditation, you probably observe the thoughts that were happening in your mind, and that's the activity of the default mode network. And beyond that is the time-based reality, level 8, and it's things like integrating emotion with memory or goal-directed behavior, decision-making, choices. All of this is the time-based reality, but this is where people spend most of their life.
Yeah.
If you start meditating, you'll reach level 7, but for the most part, people are completely oblivious to levels 1 to 6.
Okay, but that's very interesting, because for me, it was like, okay, there was my conscious part, and now, great, I've done it, I've trained my subconscious, but that's only still the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Now
the subconscious is becoming the tip of the iceberg. Like
Okay.
the holy grail really is the nervous system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question about, so the theme is on survival.
Yeah.
Why do I need survival in our current day and time?
It's pretty obvious. Unlike the brain, which has all of these different nuances, and it has so many different functions that it needs to coordinate, the nervous system is actually pretty blunt and simple. It only exists in 2 different modes. One is the sympathetic, which is fight or flight. The other is parasympathetic, which is rest and restorative. So given that it's so simple, people have very little clue how to work with it. In fact, it's like learning how to drive a car but without knowing where the brake is. So most people don't know that the brake mechanism for their own body is the heart. And because they have no way of regulating their own heartbeat, the heart actually starts to have its own response to the environment. And quite often that is fear. And the moment there's fear in the nervous system, then you get a lot of these fear-driven patterns, which is anxiety, depression. And if you look at just these 2 patterns, which is pretty extreme, depression happens when we are trying to resist this moment. And the more resistance we have, the further we go against this moment. So when we look at depression, it's actually our mind chronically trapped back in time. And anxiety is the opposite. So we are fighting against this moment in depression. In anxiety, we are running away from this moment. So it's basically fight or flight. And anxiety is really when we are chronically trapped in the future. So all of these, like, everyone talks about depression and anxiety, but no one really talks about it in terms of survival.
Yeah,
and
exactly. So
this is my USP. You know, like, if I boil down my entire work into one word, it's survival. And the reason being is that we have pretty much mapped out the brain and the nervous system under fear, but we don't look at it when it's not in fear. So when we are calm and relaxed, that's really there's not much research on it. And so we don't even know the intelligence that is available to us in that state. And we talk about the brain, the primitive regions of the brain, you know, the limbic cortex, the nervous system, as primitive, as ancient. But actually these areas of the brain has had such a long time in evolution, compared to the 2 cerebral hemispheres, which is only 4 million years old. So what we're dealing with here is very recent, and it's still trying to find its way. while the survival mechanism is very ancient. And it's actually run not by the algorithms of the mind, it's run by genetic algorithms. So even in artificial intelligence, for example, we look at neural networks. Neural networks is a very old concept. I was working with neural networks in 2008 when I was doing my master's degree. It's nothing new. The only thing that's changed right now is that we have more computational power and we have very massive storage capacity. So when you combine those things, we're able to work with, cloud computing and cluster computing and all the different ways of neural networking using artificial intelligence. But the next level of AI is actually genetic algorithms. And if you look at it biologically, where does genetic algorithms exist? It's in nature. So for example, if you watch a swarm of birds, you won't be able to say how that swarm is able to coordinate itself, but it creates all these evasive maneuvers to avoid predators. Also, a group of ants, they work so meticulously, but you don't know which one's a leader, which one's a follower, like how does that even work? So the next level of AI is mimicking genetic networks.
Okay. And so tell me if I understand well, but that reminds me of what we talked about during our first podcast, which was when you meditate, and you often do it to kind of give more importance to your prefrontal cortex, like the newest area of your brain versus more the reptilian brain. And my feeling and what you were telling me is that that reptilian brain is actually more intelligent if you use it well, right? And so my understanding is that when we try to fight against that reptilian brain that makes us do bad decisions sometimes, we throw a bit the baby with the bathwater, because if we trained it well, that gives us access to a way higher intelligence than just the one from
No, you're absolutely right. So we have actually dismissed the reptilian brain, saying it causes in psychology they talk about the amygdala hijack,
which is true in part, right?
Which is true with the nervous system under the sympathetic state, but we don't consider the intelligence of the primitive parts of the brain under the parasympathetic. And this is the body of work that I'm exploring, is like things like intuition, things like instinct is far more sophisticated when they function under the parasympathetic. These two states are unable to coexist. So it's either one or the other. And for the most part, even if you meditate, you probably don't know what it's like to be in a true parasympathetic state. That's only available to you when you start working with the nervous system.
Okay.